Hello everyone and welcome to round 5 of this year's TePe Sigeman tournament. We have a great game between Vasyl Ivanchuk and Yagiz Erdogmus. We've covered Yagiz in the previous video where he defeated none other than Super Grandmaster Richard Rapport, and he's been having a great tournament so far. He drew Niels Grandelius and Javo Krisindarov and defeated former Women's World Championship challenger Tan Zhongyi and, like I've said, Richard Rapport. On the other hand, Vasyl, not having the best event, started off with 2 draws and then losses to Niels Grandelius and to Tan Zhongyi, where he lost in a superior position, but his time just ran out, as you know, it often tends to do so. So yeah, you never know which Vasyl will show up. Let's see which Vasyl shows up today in round 5 of this wonderful event. So Vasyl with white opens with pawn to c4, and I don't know if you guys remember, I mentioned in the previous video, Yagiz is only 13 years old. He will be 14 in some 9 days. So c4, we have pawn to e5 and pawn to g3. Going for the King's English variation, we have knight to f6, bishop to g2. We have pawn to c6, d4, and this very popular bishop to b4 check. We have bishop to d2, captures, and pawn to d6. And here, I think Vasyl just wanted to get out of theory as soon as possible. Here, knight c3 is very popular. Sometimes they capture on e5, pawn to e3 sometimes, but e4... never at this level. Maybe there's one game where white lost, but that's pretty much it. And the way to counter it would be bishop to e6. You ask what do you do with the c4 pawn? Now if b3, then you take white center, and if d5, then okay, white will get the center, captures, but you will, or even better, yeah, e captures, you get the f5 square, and it's a perfectly fine position for black. But here after e4, Yagiz decided to castle, which is perfectly fine again, knight to e2, and here pawn to b5. A move that was never played, but it is the top move recommended by the engine in this position, and it is now, as of move 8, that we have a completely new game. So okay, Vasyl castles, we have knight b to d7, knight to a3, now trying to force Yagiz into breaking the tension here. Queen to b6, defending on b5, and now Vasyl advances to b4. We have pawn to a5 and c captures on b5. We have c captures, and now rook f to b1. So we can see what the Vasyl is trying to do. He's trying to trade on a5. He's trying to win the b5 pawn, maybe trade it for that e4 pawn, and he will have rooks on a and b file and the bishop controlling this beautiful diagonal. If he will have a pawn on the a file, that means maybe that pawn will be protected if the game goes into the endgame. So a similar setup you would have with black, let's say in a Benko gambit. Bishop to b7, and okay, Yagiz says, I will give you the b5 pawn for the e4 pawn. Let's trade down. B captures on a5. We have queen captures on a5. The queens come off the board, captures, and the rook captures on b5. And now there are 2 ways you could handle this, and I would say Yagiz chooses the more difficult one to handle. I imagine at such a young age you don't really care how difficult it is. You know, if it works, it works. But for example, captures, and rook a8. The being pawned down and having 2 rooks nicely doubled on the a file is definitely compensation enough for a pawn. But after rook captures on b5, he goes rook to a7, defends the bishop, and he says, no, I want to take the pawn back. And okay, Vasyl goes back also, knight to c2. We have bishop captures on e4, bishop captures, and knight captures on e4. Okay, the material is now equal. And pawn to a4. Vasyl starts advancing his a pawn. We have rook to c8 by Yagiz, knight to b4, and now pawn to g6. Investing 5 minutes into this move, and this is already very, very dangerous territory. It's only move 20, you're down to almost 7 minutes. But okay, you do get the 30 seconds increment, which is not a lot if the position gets very complicated. Vasyl strikes with pawn to a5. We have rook to c4. D captures on e5. D captures and pawn to a6. Okay, it's not much, but it's a pawn on the 6th rank. And you have 3.5 minutes on the clock. We have knight e to c5. Rook to a3. Just nicely controlling that knight on c5 and asking Yagiz to please burn more time. King to g7 and king to g2. Vasyl also down to 1 minute on the clock. pawn to e4, and bear in mind that this was a classical game. Knight to f4, we have knight to e5, and now knight f to d5. Just with 4 knights like this, I mean, 1 minute on the clock, that's insane. Well, half an hour on the clock is not enough to calculate everything that's happening here. We have knight to f3, and okay, now Vasyl says, okay, maybe I'm getting checkmated here. You know, imagine this pawn coming to g4, imagine some rook c1, rook g1 action. It has happened before. So he goes back, rook to a1, he doesn't want to burn more time, you know, calculating anything. Knight to d4, and now rook to b6. And you have to make a move. His next move was made with 2 seconds on the clock. He plays knight to c2. And knight to c2, there were moves that could hold the position, but knight to c2 loses on the spot. It's not easy to see why, and probably impossible to even calculate, but, you know, with his great clairvoyance, Vasyl was able to do it. Can you do it with 45 seconds on the clock? Have at it, while I give you a couple of seconds. So Vasyl played knight captures on c2, and I imagine all of you have as well. It is the only winning idea for a very particular reason. Knight captures, rook captures, and now rook to c6. This is it. And black has no moves. You cannot move the rook or you lose the knight. You cannot move the knight or you lose the rook. You cannot move this rook because a7 is coming. And the king, while maybe you could bring it into the game with king f8, the white rook just kicks it right back. The knight controls e7, you would have to go back, rook a3, and no moves for black. Whatever you try, let's say king h6, all of a sudden rook to c7 comes. And you just want to get rid of the rook and start advancing the pawn. That's pretty much it. That's the path to victory. If rook moves, a7, now knight b6, that's game over. So Yagiz Kaan has to do everything to prevent that. He goes knight to b3. And it is a clever way of trading off rooks. At least there will not be a rook on the a file ready to advance the passed pawn. So rook captures on c2. Vasyl again finds the only way to win. Knight captures, and now rook back to c6. Also tempting is rook to a2, but rook to c6 is better. And now kicking away the rook with getting the knight to b5, for example, or some tactics. Knight to b3, we have knight to b4, now defending the pawn. King to f8, we have rook to c8 check, and now king back to g7. Again, you cannot go to e7 due to this knight to c6 check, and after the king moves, knight captures and your rook is defended. So after rook c8, king to g7 was played, and now what do you play? Rook to c3. It's not maybe the best possible move. I mean, it is, but even if it wasn't, you know, you attack the knight, you gain some time, and then you continue pushing. Knight to a5, we have king to f1, king to f6, and now rook to c5. Again, chasing the knight, knight b3, rook to c7. Beautifully played, as if the rooks get traded, rook captures on c7, knight to d5 check, you will win the rook back, and the pawn is unstoppable. The knight and the king are nowhere near close to stop the passed pawn. So rook c7, we have rook to a8, and finally pawn to a7. Now it's merely a matter of time, or of either defending the pawn with the knight and trading off rooks, or defending the pawn with the rook and getting the knight, let's say, to b6. And that's it. So, of course, Yagiz Kaan will get the king into the game, trying to prevent that. King e6, we have knight to c2, beautifully played. Knight to a5, and now knight to d4 with check. King to d5, knight b5, we have pawn to f5, and now there are many ways you could finish this, but Vasyl finishes it in the most beautiful way possible. You could even, you know, choose a move yourself if you want, but yeah, rook to b7, spectacular. We will even give this move a double exclamation mark. I'm not, you know, fond of those, but for a move like this, I will give one, as now there's nothing more to be done. You free up the c7 square for the knight, and that's it. If the knight gets traded off, then we actually reach the position that I might use for the thumbnail. Knight c7 check, king c6, and now you're gonna capture on a8. And the king and knight are so close to the a7 pawn, but you cannot touch it. Remember, the knight needs to reach this square. Yeah, you need either this square, which does not exist, or, you know, the one up there, which does not exist. So there's no way to do it, and you cannot get closer with the king as the knight is controlling those squares, and your knight is in the way of b7. So even if you move the knight, you're just gonna play knight b6. You don't care about the knight because you want to promote the pawn, and even if you don't capture the knight, king b7, the knight from b6 covers the a8 square, and that's it. Easy victory. And other than that, after rook to b7, there's not all that much. I mean, you could move the king, but then rook b8. Rook b8 is the idea all along, and that's it. You either allow white to get a queen into the game, or you give up the rook, and then knight captures on a7 with check, and that's it. You cannot advance, you cannot do anything. Black would just be down a full rook. So yeah, after f5, rook b7, spectacularly played by Vasyl. And yeah, it was just the great unfortune of Yagiz, Kaan, Erdogmus that today the Vasyl that showed up is the Vasyl that plays, you know, engine perfect chess with seconds on the clock. So yeah, first victory in the tournament for Vasyl, first loss in the tournament for Yagiz, Kaan. The tournament is still young, anything can happen. We'll be watching and hoping to see more great games like this. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Samuel Kamuli, Nidhi Kumar, Markus Shib, Mariusz Klimek, and Zeni for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday.